Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking your time out of your day to sit in on this webinar. My name is Michael Trumper, and I'm one of the principals here at Endeavor Institute. I've been working in project risk analysis and management for a couple of decades. In this webinar, I'm going to take a slightly different approach to our normal one. Over my time here, we've had a significant proportion of our customers who are new to the process. And from this, I've seen consistent issues that cause the implementation to be either slowed or derailed completely. And many of these issues are common across any sort of implementation. But there are some specific to this area of practice. So the goal of this webinar is just to raise awareness of those issues that we have seen over the years, and maybe that you might want to have in your radar before you start. Because from our standpoint, why are we doing this? Because from our standpoint, not only do we want to avoid our software from becoming shelfware and sitting unused on people's laptops because the process has failed, but we also believe there's real value for organizations that are successfully being able to integrate project risk analysis and management into their processes. So to start off with, I've just got this little thought bubble here. I just drew it up just to signify really high level about the topics that we're going to just cover. It's really about doing this implementation, making sure you have this support process and communication in place to be successful. So let's take a look at a bit more detailed level. So what is the purpose? Why are you doing it? So often we see is that it is contractual obligation. Many projects that have government funding nowadays, if it meets a certain bar, millions of dollars in terms of spending, they actually a scheduled risk analysis has to be performed. So we get people coming in and say, we have to meet this requirement. If this is the case, you can meet the requirement using internal resource. You might need outside help. Both approaches are valid. If the contract is an outlier and you don't expect to have this requirement in the future, maybe it's a one-off on this, then probably outsourcing the risk analysis for a single purpose probably makes sense. However, if you see this as being a standard requirement in the future, you're moving into this business where this type of analysis is going to be a requirement, probably going to make some sense to build the capability internally. Alternatively, you might be looking to improve your project performance. Many times we see this part of a larger organizational shift that includes other processes such as earned value management, change management, contract management. Basically a program that's being up top to bring in to improve project management processes, improve project or the organizational maturity model. We see, but those come from high up, not at the project level, not coming up from below. Regardless, these changes often require a cultural shift in the organization and can be disruptive if not planned carefully. So key things support, and so this is probably the key issue that we see when we see that the implementation is lagging or starting to fail, and it's because there's not that support within the organization for a successful implementation. And you not only need the support of upper management, you need your support from your project team. And if you don't have and if you don't have both, how are we going to do this? My experience is that you'll need to answer two questions. Why are you doing it? And WIIFM. And it's not a new radio station. It's what's in it for me. So people are very attuned to incentives. So we need to make sure that the incentives are in place. So typically, new processes are rarely successful unless you have support from upper management. And more importantly, if you're at a project team level, you need to identify a specific champion in your upper management team who has the authority both to fund and push the process. If you don't have that, if it's a general sort of, well, we want to do this, if you don't have that go-to point of contact in that position, it's going to be very difficult to sustain a implementation. And like I said, normally this is a less of an issue, as we often see that it's coming down from a particular champion. And where we do see it normally start to get unraveled is in the other group, and that's the project team. There's an area we see a lot of pushback if the value is not communicated effectively, and the team members view this as an additional bureaucratic exercise that just serves to increase their job demands. So a personal anecdote, several years of quite a few years ago, we did have a new customer came in. They bought a substantial number of licenses, and we were engaged to come in and do some training as part of a. And what happened was it had the management team was very gung ho, but they hadn't communicated at all to their team members why they were doing it. There was a general sense within the project team members that things weren't going as well as they should, but they didn't have a really good understanding of why were they having to do this. And there was a really high level of hostility that was coming out of some of the team members. Oftentimes, it takes, it's the only way you're going to get that in if you have team members is that they will leave. But there was certainly the feedback we got that we received is that they had no idea why they were doing this specifically, on what sort of value it was, and what they personally were going to get out of it. If the project team, if they put in this and put in the effort to learn the new process, was it going to be reflected in, monetary or personal or other sort of things that would make them buy into the process? And so what I did find out is, several years after the fact, that really, except for very small places, that had become shelfware. It just wasn't being used except in very specific teams. So again, make sure all the incentives at the individual and the organization, that they're all aligned and they know why you're putting in this process. So what type of analysis are you going to do? So I've just put in these really basic icons. Is it going to be schedule? Is it going to be cost risk analysis? Is it going to be integrated cost and schedule risk analysis? Or is it going to be risk management, project risk management? All of these are all can be part of a project risk analysis and management process. Each one, and they're all related. If you drew a Venn diagram, there would be a common area in the middle, but they all require specific expertise, different data sources, tools, and objectives. In my experience, attempting all three at once, trying to do all of these at once, would almost assuredly guarantee failure. So Key is to identify the path that will get you the quickest wins, show early results, and is key to before looking to build competency in the weaker areas. So if you have a very good um, cost estimating and forecasting capability, you might want to look at implementing it there first. Alternatively, if you have a very good risk scheduling team, they'll probably be able to get that and see the results of this type of adding on this type of analysis much sooner. In this case, I call it incrementalism is going to be your friend. One example that, again, going in what we do as I see is how we look at how we discuss our enterprise solution to our potential customers. We do have some customers come in and right away they'll say, okay, we want to do this and we want to do with the risk analysis with your enterprise solution. And typically I'm going to push back at that if we can discuss what are they doing right now. A lot of times they're not doing anything right now. And what I'll do is I'll push back and I'll say, really what you should do is find a team, get them to use the desktop software as a tool and build that competency within that team, show some success. And if you're successful doing that, it will feed out into your other teams. Will see, oh, they're getting some results off of that. And at that point, going to an enterprise solution will make sense. Pushing an enterprise solution on teams that haven't been using software or are unfamiliar with the process, that are learning it, will again make it put a very high bar about whether you're going to be successful. It's going to be very difficult to do it. So we want to be look at short-term gains where you can get easy wins, do it incrementally, have a path forward. And if the goal is to bring in all of these practices in together, which I would recommend, because they all work together synergistically to improve project performance, look for where you can get those early wins and then have a path where you can add additional capabilities as your team builds competence. Processes. So once you have that set the path, you can start to consider what process and what changes are going to be required to be successful. You can sort of break that down into training, tools, maybe the use of outside resources. So for an example, as a training issue and process issue is most common issue we get when we have new customers coming in and they're doing implementation is schedule quality. Often the new customers, they might have tools that are more planning, or they have tools that are not set up correctly to create high quality schedules that you need for schedule risk analysis. And they become and what we do is we get calls from users who are very frustrated because they're getting some really strange results. They're not getting the results that they want to. And that's because they have not been trained how to develop a high quality schedule. So that's a very simple one. And it's a simple one, but it's also a big win. Having that requirement in place and knowing that we need to sort of up the quality of what our schedule or the data that you're getting in to be able to do a valid analysis is key. So that's just an example of what we see that's sort of missed in that commonly gets missed when they're starting to implement this process. And it takes a while. So to be able to build that up, because scheduling is a specific expertise, and it's not just because you have a tool in front, you put the tool in front of people, it doesn't mean that they will be able to develop valid schedules. They can develop valid work plans, but will the logic, is it updatable? Can you run at a minimum run a critical path on it? Needs to be assessed. And if you don't have that in the system in your teams right now, you need to look at, do we need to hire someone, or can we do some training to bring that in? For risk management, a lot of times you're going to look at, do you need outside, or do you want to hire outside consultants to run your risk management, your risk workshops, or you identify? A lot of times having a third-party consultant who has, I call it, no skin in the game, makes sense. They will be able to be that sort of neutral arbiter of and moderator of those discussions. Other companies that we've worked with in the past actually have a team of who are report up an entirely different structure, so they're not beholden to any project teams, and they go in and they run these risk workshops. Again, just things to think about when you're developing your processes, about where your gaps in your expertise and tools. Just make sure that you've done a fairly good survey of those, and that you're going to be able to have a pathway where you can go from where you are to where you want to be. Data. So as with any process, it's garbage in, garbage out. And what we really want, the best sort of data to avoid that trap, is historical data. In our first book that we published, Project Decisions, in 2007, and we just released in another version, I think second edition, 2000, last year. One of the things that we did cover in there, almost a chapter on that, was the value and the essential nature of having that historical data, so that you have some real reality check on what the data that you're putting into the system. So it's always going to be, you're always going to have a more successful when you have that historical data for actuals, for risks, for schedules, and costs. If you're lucky enough that your company has kept accurate records from previous projects, that's the best place to go, because not only does it reflect the type of projects that you've performed, but also specifically how your organization has performed in the past. If the data is not available, I would highly recommend that you start capturing and storing data in a format that is easily accessed or accessible by your project teams. If, as with many, this data is unavailable, there are external sources for this data, most commonly for costs and risk, but there are sources for schedules as well. Most of this data you'll see is considered reference class forecasting, if you're familiar with Flyberg's research on this, and that's where it's all come from. And there's a lot, I won't go into them right now, but there's many national and professional organizations that have sources that are available for this, and professional organizations such as AACI. And just as a shout out, the website Herding Cats, if you have never visited it, I highly recommend it. It's has one of the most extensive references to topics on the risk analysis and management, and links to these types of sources. and are used for the development of this data can be all found there. So anyways, that would be one, and I will can include this and send this out if you're interested, link to that. But it's a great site, and whenever I have looking for information on this type, I always sort of do a quick search through the vast amount of references that are on that site. So finally, reporting, and I call it the who, what, and when question. And this is very key. Who are you going to be reporting to? Because you can have multiple different groups that require different types of things. So, you know, ownership groups or external stakeholders will have completely different reporting requirements than your engineering or construction teams. So you want to identify, have a clear idea about who you're going to be who you're going to be reporting to, what those reports will include, and the timing. And timing is essential, and that sort of, and timing will go back to processes. All of this goes back to processes. Because just to be able to, if you have a very frequent reporting cycle, getting your processes aligned is extremely important. What I said, and just a sort of a real, you know, example. One of our clients, we had to produce a single chart that would be on page 3 of one report, and it was a, you know, if I looked at it, said, well, there's not a lot of data there for, you know, decision making, but that's all it required, and it was a very high level, you know, intended for to be looked at by someone who's extremely busy, but it captured enough data that they could, you know, that it would keep them relatively informed on what's occurring, what the progress is, what the, you know, estimates for you know, completion. Are we on, you know, what's the P80 completion date right now? Whereas the engineering groups would, a lot of times they thrive on having really complex, more data. They might even want customized reports that have extreme amounts of data that drills down to the very, you know, minutiae that you can get at an activity level, all the different sensitivities, and you need to be able to understand when those need to go out and who they're going out to. Just had recently with a customer, and I said, we're going in, I said, well, what are you going to report to them at the end? And it wasn't, they didn't know. I said, well, are you going to give is it cumulative probability? Do you need these markers on it? Do you need a sensitivity analysis? Are you going to be, you know, is it going to be a risk matrix that you're having, or is it going to be risk ranking? So you could do from our risk registry, you might get the risk scoring. All of these things, it was quite vague at that time. So we'd gone through the whole process of developing, how do you develop a model? How do you get the data in? How do you develop that model? And then it was, well, what are you going to report? It was, oh, we need to do this type of analysis. Yes, but that, you know, and then that analysis involves many things. You know, is it a project? You want to results at the project level. You want it at an activity level, WBS level. What sort of results are you going to be putting out? And all of that was blank, pulled a blank. They didn't know. And so we've gone through this whole process and they still didn't know. The good thing about it is that they then became aware of that. But there was, that requirement was completely. It was just, you need to do this. You need to do this analysis. But actually, what that analysis and how we report was entirely nebulous at that point. We didn't know. So at that point, we called it a day, and I said, you know what, we'll come back, and once you understand what you do, I'll show you how you can generate those reports. And when you have to do it, because then I said, well, is it going to be a one-time, or is it going to be is it going to occur multiple times? And they didn't know that either. I said, because if you're going to have to do it let's say at every major stage gate, or you're having to do it weekly or monthly or bi-monthly or quarterly or semi-annually, you do need to know those, because building in that process that you can get that data into the model, update the data, is really important. That if you have to get the reports out, and the more churn there is, the more difficult that's going to be. And so you may have to make sure you have your processes aligned. So again, these are just all things that sometimes seem to get lost in the as people go up, and we want just to make sure that as you're moving into a new process, that you know where you're going, you know why you're doing it, you've got the support, and you understand the basically resources and everything that will be needed, and what the end product will be, and who it's going to. All of those things need to be brought in, because if you don't have those fairly well thought out and mapped out, you're probably going to hit some roadblocks. It will slow down the implementation, or like I said, sometimes we do see it just crashes out because the underlying foundation to doing these sorts of implementations are not there. So thank you for sitting in on this webinar. It's a bit shorter than we normally do. I hope you found it informative. And if you'd like to learn more about our software, please visit us at www.intabor.com. You can send me some questions. You'll get a link after this. We are recording this webinar, and it will be uploaded onto our site if you want to get a recording of it within 72 hours. Thank you, everyone, for sitting in. And I haven't seen any questions come in. So I'm just going to we'll end the webinar here. Again, thank you very much for your time, and look forward to hearing from you in the future.